Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing every Resident Evil on PC on the ROG Ally. So we got RE Remake, RE0, RE2 Remake, RE3, RE4 Remake, RE4, RE5, RE6, RE7, Revelations 2, and Village. So let's get started with the first game. Resident Evil Remake HD. So this is a remaster of the remake for the GameCube of a game from the GameCube era. So we got everything on the highest, on 1080p, the native resolution. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow me to put 120 Hz, so essentially we do not have a VRR enabled. Not sure if it's an issue on my side. If you have screen tearing, enable VSync in this case. And we're playing at 18 watts, so let's get into it. Welcome to Resident Evil HD Remake. So we're at 18 watts, as you can see in the menu. This should give us more than an hour and a half of battery, which is pretty good. I mean, pretty good for a ROG Ally. You can get a little bit more battery if you lock it to 60 FPS, which is what I would recommend to use a VSync, because for some reason 120 Hz isn't available as an option for me in the game. So basically VRR would be missing. Whoops. But you stay above 60, so that's completely fine. We're playing on native 1080p. If you're looking for even more battery life, which is understandable, you can put it at 720p and lock it to 60. So let's get away from the zombie very quickly. But it's a very light game, so 18 watts shouldn't be a problem. And it looks very crisp on the small screen. The backgrounds, you can tell they're old. There's HD projects for this, which I would highly recommend with upscaled backgrounds. But I think on the smaller screen, the native game itself is completely fine. Still a fantastic game. And at 18 watts, I mean, it's a great experience, at least in my opinion. So let's jump into the next one. Resident Evil 0, this one 1080p, here 120 Hz, thank you very much Capcom, and everything on the highest settings. We're also at 18 watts, so let's get into the game. Welcome to Resident Evil 0, as you can see 18 watts, like before, for maximum battery life and performance. Visually this game, well, in my opinion, looks way better than Resident Evil 1 Remake. But it also supports 120 Hz right out of the box. Man, the FMVs. But as you can see, we're over 60 basically all the time, which is perfect. At a low wattage like this, runs very similar to RE1 HD Remake. And again, due to the 120 Hz support, you actually have a VRR, and it loads very quickly when going from one area to another. This game, by the way, is installed on the microSD card. Ooh, dogs. I don't know if I'm getting him. No, I'm not. Oh, Jesus. Boy, Sid, good job. Jesus Christ. Dogs are annoying in those games. So let's jump into the next one. This one, completely fine, looks awesome. So yeah. For Resident Evil 2 Remake, we're on 1080p, no ray tracing, ultra quality FSR1 on the smaller screen. I think it looks pretty good. Well, basically like this. Mesh quality didn't change things that much. High shadows, everything like this. We only lowered volumetric lighting quality. And that's basically it. And we're targeting 6 FPS. And we are at 20 watts, as you can probably see. That should give you like 90 minutes of battery. And if I plug to the wall, put it at 25 watts, and you'll have improvement to performance. Maybe 3-4 FPS more in this case. But with a VRR window, we're within that VRR window, it'll look super smooth, no tearing whatsoever.
Focus.
And it's basically between 60 and whatever hundreds of FPS we get in less demanding scenarios. And it's a very good looking game. It always impresses me what they achieved with this performance. And this is the new edition, quote-unquote, of the game that allows us to use ray tracing, but really I don't think is worth using. Very subtle, and at the same time, I mean, it stutters less than the original game, which is great in my book. So would I recommend it on the ROG Ally? Hell yeah. Over 60, looks amazing, ultra quality FSR, and you can also do 720p or 900p instead if you want more frames. Personally, I think using the native resolution in this case looks great, good enough performance, and there's some minor stuttering here and there, but way less than the original, so yeah, big win for this one. Resident Evil 3 Remake, 1080p, no ray tracing obviously. Ultra quality FSR, just like Resident Evil 2, 120Hz refresh rate for that VRR to be enabled. Basically like this. So we only lower the volumetric fog, basically, volumetric lighting. But the rest is basically cranked up. And we're on 1080p, so the UI is super sharp. We get ultra quality FSR 1, which again is not perfect, but on the smaller screen it looks amazing, so no complaints there. Alternatively, you can do native 900p instead, but the UI won't be as sharp, so the choice is yours, completely optional. And we're also at 20 watts, so if you're plugged in, make sure to put it at 25 watts, so you stay above that 57 FPS range. That's just my advice. So 20 watts for portable play, I would say. So your battery life is over an hour. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste, in my opinion. So yeah, some minor drops into the 50s, but again, still inside the VRR window, and it's in very select moments, so you should be fine. Especially with that 25 watts if you're plugged in. But as you can see, completely fine. Runs very similar to Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is to be expected. This came out a year after, I think. So yeah, let's see, let's try and dodge him. Didn't work. But it's a great experience, super fluid, we're at the native resolution for the UI. And explosions is basically what drops the frame rate for us. So yeah, highly recommended on the ROG Ally. Runs and looks good. For the original Resident Evil 4, you do need the Resident Evil 4 HD project. This is the correct way to play the game on PC, at least in my opinion. So link with instructions in the description. You get to this page, download it. It's around 30 something gigabytes, so keep that in mind. And it's very easy to install, so let's get into it right away. Once the HD project is installed, make sure to select 120Hz for VRR, full screen, 4x MSIA, we have enough GPU power to do so. Shadows on high, textures on HD, subtitles off, and the frame rate is set to 60 because there's no over 60s on this game, unfortunately. Apart from this, we're going to be using the RE4 tweaks, which is the F1 key that you can map to the back of the ROG Ally. We're going to add a couple things, additional FOV, so let's put it at 20, that seems to be ideal. And then lots of fixes that are already enabled for visuals and all that good stuff. Alright, so with those tweaks ready, now we have a nice FOV. As you can see, the game is locked to 60, but with VRR being, well, enabled due to the 120Hz thing, we actually get no screen tearing whatsoever. And the game looks amazing. I mean, this is the way to play classic RE4, at least in my opinion. Visually is much superior, and you're basically getting the same experience as before when it comes to gameplay, but with fixed bugs on the gameplay visual department, because there are some bugs due to the 60 FPS thing, because this game was originally 30. And what to say, it works pretty well. Nope. So this is great, this is 1080p, has all those visual fixes, looks incredible. I mean, look at those new models and textures. That's why this update mod, to say it in some way, is like 40 gigs. Not a coincidence. And I'm trying to block like in the remake. Not having a block button, a parry button in the Resident Evil 4 now feels weird after playing the remake. It works fantastically well, as expected. And actually we're at 25 watts. So let's do this correctly and put it at 18. My bad. Performance is still good. And battery life should be more than, yeah, around 2 hours. That's my guess. With 18 watts, it's just fine. Works as you would expect. But please do enable the HD project. You really want those visuals. Trust me on that one. It's such a better experience, especially with the extra FOV. Come on. Reduce 2 atoms. And we're not dropping any frames. Some very minor stutters every once in a while, but otherwise we're good. So let's jump into the next one. Resident Evil 5, one of my favorites. I know, very popular opinion. So 2 times MSA 1080p, 120Hz. Shadows on high, everything on the highest settings. And that's basically it. We're at 18 watts, since it's an older game, so it shouldn't be a big issue. The only place where I saw it drop was basically in this area, when there's a lot of enemies, especially in the No Mercy Mercenaries option, that has lots more enemies than usual. But as you can see, well, we're well inside the VRR window. Even here in this part, that it drops a little. So yeah, works perfectly fine. Looks super crisp on the smaller screen. We have 2 times MSA, so even crispier, believe it or not. And it works right away. You don't have to do anything. Yeah, I love when older games are actually good PC ports. Also, it's locked to 120 FPS, so you cannot go beyond that, but the screen goes up to 120, so not a big loss there in my opinion. And it's a fantastic game. You can also do split screen if you want to, but on the smaller screen I wouldn't recommend it. Just plug it into a TV if you plan on doing that. But it's great, one of my favorite ones in the franchise, despite being the least Resident Evil of all of them, I'd say. Anybody else? So again, what it drops is in Mercenaries, in the No Mercy mode, that has way more enemies. That's basically it. And if you want more battery life, lock it to 6 FPS. There is an in-game FPS lock for that. But it shouldn't be a huge difference when it comes to battery. If you really want to boost battery life, maybe 720p with a 6 FPS lock at 18 watts. But like this, I think it should be good enough. Looks super crisp and smooth. So let's jump into the next one, shall we? Let me first get to the big guy. Oh, okay, never mind. There we go. I just wanted a punch in. Everybody's favorite, Resident Evil 6, so 1080p, 120Hz. And basically the highest settings, so let's get into it. This one also at 18 watts. Unlike on Resident Evil 5, it's basically hundreds of FPS unless you're playing the No Mercy Mercenaries, which has way more enemies than usual. That one drops into the 60s when you're in that situation. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, you're good to go. Looks super sharp on the screen, stays inside the VRR window. If you're plugged into the wall, it's basically 120 all the time at 25 watts. Except again in the Mercenaries, No Mercy. Move, punch to the face. Despite what people say about Resident Evil 6, I really like the controls. I love being able to just dodge around and jump into my back and shoot them. So mobility is one thing that they got completely right, at least in my opinion. For an action game, I mean. So yeah, as you can see, completely fine. I think it's time to jump into the next one. For Resident Evil 7, we need to take a slightly different approach. You need to go into Properties, Betas, and choose the DX11 non-RT version, because the latest version is kind of broken, at least in my opinion. So for the best experience, select this. It will re-download the game for you. So let's get into it. So for settings, we got 1080p, 120Hz, so we got VRR, variable frame rate, 0.9 resolution scaling, so 90% resolution, only 10% less pixels, no big deal on such a small screen, medium textures because VRAM is very high in this game. And that's basically it. Those are the settings. We also lowered the volumetrics. And our target is basically 6 FPS at 20 watts. I think we can actually drop it to 18 watts. Yeah, there we go. 18 watts for maximum battery life. And we're on, again, native resolution with 10% less resolution than the screen's native. Which again, on the smaller screen, you're not going to notice a difference. Car inside the garage. Crashing against the enemy. Legendary moment. As you can see, the GPU is fully utilized, which is wonderful. That means, especially if you are playing on a lower resolution, as an example, you're still going to get about 60. If you don't mind 720p with a less crisp UI, you're going to have even more battery life. I suggest you stay at 18 watts and on the DX11 version of the game. But overall, the game is completely fine, super smooth. And inside the VRR window. Alright, we grab the pistol. Such a legendary moment. But as you can see here, at least when I played it on PlayStation 4 once, it was where it dropped. I think we can actually even add the reflections back. There's quite a few reflective surfaces in this part. Put it on enabled. You lose some frames, but here you get way more reflections. Whoa. So yeah, I would say keep reflections on. I changed my mind on that one. And as you can see, despite being medium textures, it's using like 5 GB of VRAM. That's kind of crazy, in my opinion. But that's how RE7 has been for me. So yeah, nothing more to add. Great looking game still. The first RE Engine title, I think. So if you want to play it, you can't go wrong with it. Resident Evil Revelations 1, native resolution, 120Hz, so we have VRR. And then on the advanced options, basically on the highest settings. So let's get back into the game. So as I was saying, it feels a little bit too smooth for my liking, which is weird to say. But it's basically over 100 most of the time. I'm not sure if I was able to drop this game below 100 FPS. And we're on native 1080p at 18 watts, so if you're playing plugged in, it's probably going to be locked to 120. That's pretty good. But considering originally it was a Nintendo 3DS game, it kinda makes sense. But it's good to see that it supports 120. Pretty cool. And battery life, if you lock it to 60 and maybe play it at 900p, there should be even more battery life, so this game is perfect. So let's jump into the next one, not much to say about this one honestly. Resident Evil Revelations 2, 1080p, 120Hz, so we have VRR, and basically standard settings with high textures. And this one honestly disappointed me when it comes to performance. We're at 20 watts instead of 18 because we actually need it. And in areas that there is vegetation and it's nighttime, when you look into the distance, well, as you can see, it drops below 6 FPS. Also happened on the Steam Deck, but I thought this on the Ally was going to be way better when it came to that. Of course, on the Steam Deck we're playing at 720p, but still, considering the age of the game, this shouldn't be a thing, in my opinion. And I have no ammo whatsoever. What the hell? But it works. Just when looking into the distance, in certain sections with lots of foliage, you're going to drop into the 50s, which is still well within the VRR range. But I do recommend you keep that in mind. Yeah, it's not perfect. I don't know why it drops so hard. But keep it at 20 watts to be able to stay more close to 60, which is pretty funny. Resident Evil 7 runs better than this. But I think it's a big issue. Maybe because of the age of the game, I don't know. Or the way it was implemented. But it's not all the time, it's mostly in those locations. When you're indoors, it's completely fine. The thing is, in these areas, you're not actually indoors. That's why I'm testing it here. So yeah, this was when Capcom tried to do episodic games. I remember everybody was doing that back then. And well, now you can buy every episode if you want to. And the game is a lot of fun. The thing is, as I said, performance leaves a lot to be desired in these more open locations, at least in my opinion. For Resident Evil Village, we got once again 1080p, 120Hz, so VRR, quality FSR1. You can also use ultra quality. I'll probably go for that one. It's FSR1, so it's not amazing, but on the smaller screen, especially with a base 1080p resolution, in my opinion, is completely worth it. Disable ray tracing. And it's basically like this. Let's put this on SSAO. And those are the settings. So we're at 20 watts because this is a newer game, to say it in some way. And as you can see here, in a demanding part, quote unquote, that has lots of foliage. I mean, if you don't look into the most demanding stuff, you're usually into the 50s. So again, inside the VRR window, which is good enough, at least in my opinion. So I'm targeting this area on purpose. You can also do 900p or 720p. 720p wouldn't require FSR at all, but the UI would be much less, how to say this? Much less defined. It'll be block here. So from a user experience standpoint, in my opinion, 1080p should be a good idea with FSR. You can also install the Resident Evil framework to use FSR2. That looks a lot better. Although that's a little bit extra work, so In my opinion, most people are not going to do this. I'm also playing in third person, which actually decreases performance a little bit. Third person decreases performance because we get a wider FOV. First person, the performance is a little bit better. Personally, I'm more of a third person guy when it comes to Resident Evil.
I'm sure Louisa will help.
So yeah, Resident Evil Village works just fine. But if you want to use 18 watts, consider 720p. Resident Evil 4 Remake, so we're going to do both 30 watts when plugged in, and then 18 to 20 watts for handheld for battery life. 1080p, performance FSR2, so yeah, this game is pretty demanding in comparison to the previous ones. Everything like this. The reflections are disabled, they are pretty distracting and also affect performance. And that's basically it. Of course, no ray tracing, and this is to have shadows indoors from multiple light sources. Not really a huge performance impact in most of the game. And I'm basically targeting close to 40 FPS at 30 watts. So not perfect whatsoever. But usually when there is a good amount of vegetation, like here, is when it likes to drop. I'm just going to run away, hopefully don't touch the bear trap. There we go. But it's a pretty demanding game. I'll probably, even at 30 watts, target 900p with performance FSR2. If you're trying to get 60s or something closer to that. So yeah, not perfect, also looks pretty blurry. On the smaller screen, it's okay. But you get a sharp UI, which I think is pretty important. Oof. And as you can see, using the scope destroys the frame rate, that's the usual thing. But at 40s it feels good enough. It's basically a third of the refresh rate. So that's not too bad. But this is when you're plugged in to the official charger. So my advice is to try a lower setting on handheld mode. But when it comes to plugged in, 1080p is not super bad. Could be much worse, let's be honest here. So there is drops, a lot of drops actually. And we're on performance FSR2. There's a mod to inject FSR2 without the in-game's blurry TAA, but it had a broken UI with it, which I don't understand why, so I cannot recommend the FSR2 mod for this one, at least not on the ROG Ally. I don't know why the UI basically breaks with that mod. Very quickly I'm going to show you 720 plugged in, then we unplug the ROG Ally. Now the same settings as before, but 720p, make sure this is at 120, it's at 60 due to my capture card, FSR2 on quality. And as you can see, even when plugged in, we're into the 40s in here. Which is kinda to be expected. At least in this section. My guess is that we are CPU limited because the GPU is not 100% maxed out. Which is kind of a shame really. Because on the GPU side I think we could actually hit 60s. But going lower than this of the settings didn't change things much for me. So yeah. Let's jump into the handheld mode and the conclusion. So now on the ROG Ally's smaller screen, as you can see, I can select 720 at 120 Hz, same settings on quality FSR2, and as you can probably notice, 20 watts for maximum battery life, and not killing performance that much. And well, unfortunately we cannot hit 60s all the time, seems to be a CPU limitation. I tried 720p performance FSR, it still dropped pretty hard, so yeah. The game still looks pretty good though. But here, as you can see, I'm in the mid 40s, but if I cranked it up to 25 watts, that kills battery life. I jump into the 50s instead, so 3-4 FPS improvement. But in my opinion, in these cases, battery life is what matters, so... Or just plugged into the wall. But on the smaller screen it looks pretty good, I'm pretty impressed. And it's not 30s, it's over 40s. We're not inside the VRR range, but we have the low frame rate compensation going on. And since 40 FPS is a third of 120, it actually looks pretty sweet on the 120 Hz panel. So yeah, I recommend playing this at 720p, definitely. But when you aim down the scope, is when it drops the most. The scope on everything, it really does destroy the frame rate. But a Resident Evil 4 remake on the go, pretty good stuff. I played this on Steam Deck as well, but I couldn't maintain 40s in scenarios like this. So I can definitely see the improvement visually, especially visually due to the quality FSR2 instead of performance. On the Steam Deck I had to drop the resolution lower. So yeah, well, it's not perfect, it's actually pretty good. I'd say completely playable. And you get around, yeah, an hour and 20 minutes, something like that, on a full charge. I'm at full brightness, so that does make a difference. But still. La campana. Let's reload the save so we can fight again. So it's time for the conclusion, the Resident Evil franchise on the ROG Ally. I'm pretty impressed on how many of them can be played at 18 watts. Let's try 18 watts on this one. It's going to drop frames even further, but still, this should give us a little bit extra battery life. But, I mean, Resident Evil 4 with the HD project is incredible, at least in my opinion. That's the best way to play Resident Evil 4, at least the original. And it runs at 60 frames, no problem, at 1080p. Most of the franchise is basically 1080p, no issues whatsoever. Even the newer ones, like Village, 7, you just need a little bit of upscaling, very little upscaling actually on those. Oh, I thought he was behind me. So yeah, the only one that drops below 60 is actually RE4 Remake, which I think is a big achievement. And now I'm even playing at 18 watts, so if I plug to the wall, you get a nice improvement. Or just play at 20 watts with your battery. Oh, okay. So yeah, I think it's amazing how well they run on the ROG Ally. Almost all of them native resolution. And again, I highly recommend, if you like Resident Evil, or even if you've never played it, that you take it for a spin. They have decent battery life at 18 watts, most of them. And the more demanding ones, I recommend 20 to 25 watts, because there is a nice boost to the frame rate, but plugged into the wall. If you're not plugged into the wall, 18 to 20 watts. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did revisiting the entire Resident Evil franchise. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.